A good Erev Shabbos! How are you, my lovely sisters and brothers? It's almost Shabbos. Buckle your seatbelts. We've got an amazing page of the Talmud today, packed with stories, incidents, examples, goodness, wisdom, blessing. Let's light up the darkness. We can't afford to waste any time today because I want to try to do the whole daf because it's a big daf and it's just a packed daf. Who's with us today on a Friday afternoon? You're going to be so glad you were here. Yehud in South Carolina, Paul in Chicago, Steve, and in New Hampshire, Bill in mid-Missouri, Paul in the Great Northwest. What's news? Says best wishes. Nancy in North Carolina, Paula loves the sound. Ruth is in Kentucky, Karen is in North California, Clarice is in Connecticut, Gordo in Scotland, welcome from across the pond, John in Maine, over on the YouTube side, haven't checked in yet. All right, today's episode of AT Daily sponsored by Scott Gregory in honor of Lindsay Batsu. Now, since he's giving me with the mother's name, perhaps it's for a refuah. So if so, may Lindsay Batsu have a complete and speedy recovery from whatever may be ailing her. And if not, may she should be showered in blessings. And you, Scott, and all your loved ones should be showered in blessings. And we say amen. And thank you for enabling us to reach more people with more Torah around the world. All right, we are holding on page 9 here in Tractate Moed Katan, the 12th volume of the Talmud, the 12th tractate of the Talmud, I should really say. We're going to pick it up just a few lines from the top on page 9, and we've been talking about this idea that you shouldn't mix one joy with another. So you wouldn't schedule a wedding on the intermediate days of a festival when you're already rejoicing in the festival, because the wedding is its celebration, it has its own joy, and the festival is its own celebration with its own time to rejoice, and you shouldn't mix these things because then neither is getting the attention and the amount of joy that it deserves. And the Gemara asks, with regard to the principle that one may not mix one joy with another joy, from where do we derive it? And the Gemara explains that the source is as it is written with regard to the dedication of the temple built by Solomon. So at the time that Solomon's temple, the first temple, was being dedicated, we learn at 1 Kings 8:65, so Solomon held the feast at that time, and all Israel with him, a great congregation, from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt, before the Lord our God, 7 days and 7 days, 14 days. And if it is so that one may in fact mix one joy with another joy, so he should have waited until the festival of Sukkos, which was the second set of 7 days, and made a feast of 7 days for this and for that. In other words, Sukkos could have been the dedication of the temple for 7 days and celebrating Sukkos, and then people wouldn't have had to take 2 weeks off from work. But he didn't do that. He did a 7-day dedication of the temple, immediately followed by a 7-day festival of Sukkos. And the Gemara raises a question, and this would seem to show that he didn't want to mix one joy with another. The temple got its joy, and Sukkos got its joy. And that Gemara asks, well, perhaps, however, it may be derived from here only that we do not delay a wedding to be on a festival, just as King Solomon did not delay the temple dedication to be on the festival, But nevertheless, where it happens to occur that way, we may indeed prepare a feast to celebrate both occasions together. And the Gemara answers, if this were permitted, Solomon should have left a small part of the temple unfinished until the festival, and thereby arranged for a joint celebration. In other words, the temple was done, so they celebrated that it was done. But if the temple had been done a week later, so then at that moment it would have been done, and they would have had the dedication of the temple, and it could have coincided with Sukkos. And they could have easily arranged that by finishing the entire magnificent structure and just leaving, one nail to tap in. And we do that. We tap in that nail at the right time. We wait a week. And then the two celebrations could have coincided. But he didn't do that. And so we're learning you don't mix one joy with another. The Gemara responds, no, that was not an option. One may not leave any part of the building of the temple undone as a mitzvah. It's a commandment to, serve in the temple. It's a commandment to bring the offerings in the temple. It was a commandment to build the temple. So you wouldn't leave a mitzvah undone. A mitzvah should be completed as quickly as possible. And the Gemara modifies its previous opinion. Okay, so Solomon should have left the cubit-wide plates with spikes, which were designed to eliminate the ravens, unfinished, right? You've seen this like on streetlights in various places in cities. They don't want the birds perching there where they're going to poop on what's below. They didn't want ravens perched on the temple and pooping on what's below. So they had a special thing with spikes to get rid of the ravens. So they could have left that unfinished. The roof of the temple was fitted with the sharp metal spikes to deter the ravens, who were attracted by the smell of the sacrificial meat from perching there. And although this was not considered a part of the building itself, delaying its installation would have allowed Solomon to delay the celebration of the temple dedication, and then that way they could have coincided with Sukkos. And the Gemara rejects this opinion as well. The cubit-wide plates with spikes to eliminate the ravens was a necessary element in the building of the temple, and consequently Solomon could not delay its construction either. Rather, the proof is from the redundancy in the verse. Since it is written 14 days, why do I need the verse to specify 7 days and 7 days? Learn from it that these 7 days of celebrating the temple dedication must be discrete, and similarly, these 7 days of celebrating the temple must be discrete. Discrete meaning distinct, right? D-I-S-C-R-E-T-E, distinct. So the 7 days of the dedication are their own unit, and the 7 days of Sukkos are their own unit, and they did not mix them. Apropos this discussion of the celebration of Solomon's dedication of the temple, the Gemara relates that Rabbi Parnach said, that Rabbi Yochanan said, that year the Jewish people did not observe Yom Kippur. What? Yom Kippur is commanded, a mega commandment in the Torah that we observe Yom Kippur every year. Why didn't they observe Yom Kippur that year? Well, let's think about it. When is Yom Kippur in relation to Sukkos? 5 days before Sukkos. The celebration of building the temple lasted 7 days, and all those 7 days occurred before Sukkos began. So the 7 days of the temple dedication of Solomon's temple fell over Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur was in the midst of that. So you might have thought that they paused the celebration, observed the fast and atonement of Yom Kippur, and then resumed celebrating. But no, they didn't celebrate Yom Kippur that year. And the people were worried, and they said, well, perhaps the enemies of the Jewish people, which is a euphemism for the Jewish people themselves in these kinds of situations, perhaps the enemies of the Jewish people have become liable to be destroyed for the transgression of eating on Yom Kippur. The whole population ate on Yom Kippur. And perhaps they're all going to be destroyed, since eating on Yom Kippur is punishable by charis, right? Death at the hands of heaven. And a divine voice issued forth and said to them, all of you are designated for life in the world to come, right? A heavenly voice told them, you need not worry. You are correct to skip Yom Kippur this year as you are busy celebrating the construction and dedication of the Holy Temple. And the Gemara asks, what derivation led them to conclude that it was permitted for them to eat on Yom Kippur? And the Gemara explains that they based their ruling on a kal v'chomer inference, a fortiori. If in the little case you can do this, then in the big case you could certainly do that, right? That kind of structure. So if at the dedication of the tabernacle, the temporary dwelling place of God that we carried around with us in the wilderness before we entered the Holy Land, and then it stood in the Holy Land for hundreds of years, and eventually it was replaced by the permanent structure, the Holy Temple, right? So if at the dedication of the tabernacle, whose sanctity is not a permanent sanctity, an individual's offering, i.e. an offering of one of the tribal princes, when they dedicated the tabernacle in the wilderness, each tribe sent a representative with a bunch of gifts of silver and gold and other stuff. So an individual's offering, i.e. an offering of one of the tribal princes, overrode the prohibition of Shabbos, as the prince's offerings were brought every day, including Shabbos, despite the attendant transgression of a prohibition that is punishable by stoning. Then, with regard to the dedication of the temple, whose sanctity is a permanent sanctity, and the offerings brought there were communal offerings, is it not all the more so clear that the dedication of the temple overrides the prohibition of Yom Kippur, a violation that is punishable by the less severe punishment of Karis, right? If when they dedicated the temple, when they dedicated the tabernacle, which was a temporary structure with temporary sanctity, a tent, they still violated Shabbos, which is a very severe transgression punishable by stoning, in order to receive the offerings of individuals, which each prince brought on behalf of the tribe, but it was brought by an individual. Then all the more so when they built the temple, which is a permanent structure with permanent sanctity, and they weren't overriding Shabbos, they were overriding the prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur, which is punishable not by stoning, but by karis, which is a less severe punishment. So for a sort of a greater gain with a lesser evil, right, a lesser transgression, it seems logical that that would have been allowed. And the Gemara asks, but if they had firm basis for their behavior, why were they worried? Why were they worried, right? It said that they were worried, but they had a good argument why it was good to skip Yom Kippur that year. And the Gemara answers that one can refute the Kal V'chomer as follows. There, at the dedication of the tabernacle, Shabbos was desecrated only for the necessities of the temple service to God on high, i.e., by sacrificing offerings. Here, at the dedication of the temple, they desecrated Yom Kippur by eating and drinking themselves, which was for the need of common mortals, not so that the altar could receive offerings to go up to the Most High. Based on this distinction, the Gemara suggests, well, here too, at the dedication of the temple, they should have performed the rites of the sacrificial offerings, and they should not have eaten or drunk. Okay, they could have had the dedication and celebrated and just fasted on that day. And the Gemara answers, there's no rejoicing without eating and drinking. How could they be rejoicing in the 7-day dedication of the newly built Holy Temple and not eat or drink? There's no rejoicing without eating or drinking. With regard to the proof itself, the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that the offerings brought at the dedication of the tabernacle overrode Shabbos? How do we know that when each day a different tribe's prince would bring a whole set of offerings, every day each tribe sent exactly the same amount of, golden vessels and silver vessels and animals for offerings, etc., like a whole wagon load of stuff. It was always the same, but each tribe uniquely sent its version of that sort of laundry list, or that shopping list of offerings that was given during the dedication. All 12, right? All 12 tribes gave. Well, how do we know that they brought, in other words, they brought all those offerings on a wagon, transported it on Shabbos, which was violating Shabbos. But how do we know they did that? Maybe they paused in the dedication of the tabernacle for Shabbos. If we say it is as written with regard to the offerings brought by the tribal princes on the first day, Numbers 7:12, and on the seventh day, Numbers 7:48, well, this is not a conclusive proof, as perhaps this refers not to the seventh day of the week, but to the seventh day of the sacrificial offerings, Perhaps they skipped Shabbos and did not sacrifice offerings connected to the dedication of the tabernacle on Shabbos. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, the verse also states on the day of the 11th day, number 772. And the repetition of the word day indicates that just as a day is all one continuous period of time, so too the 11 days were all one continuous period of time with no break in the middle, even for Shabbos. And the Gemara asks, but perhaps this refers only to days that are fit for the individual's offerings, i.e., the offerings were sacrificed on 11 consecutive days that were suitable for sacrificing the offerings of an individual, but not on Shabbos. And the Gemara answers, in another verse it is written, on the day of the 12th day, indicating that just as a day is all one continuous period of time, so too the 12 days were all one continuous period of time. And the Gemara asks again, but perhaps here too, this is referring to days that are fit for sacrificing offerings of an individual, which is every weekday, but not Shabbos. And the Gemara rejects this opinion. If so, why do I need two verses? The verse with regard to the 11th day and the verse with regard to the 12th day to teach the same principle. The fact that the Torah uses repetitive phrasing in both verses indicates that all the days were consecutive without a break for Shabbos. And the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that the feasting at the time of the dedication of Solomon's temple overrides Yom Kippur so that the people did not have to fast? Right? They made that Kal v'chomer argument why it should be permitted, but can we derive it from Scripture? If we say it is derived from that which is written, 14 days, perhaps this is referring to days that are fit for feasting, to the exclusion of Yom Kippur. Maybe they just skipped Yom Kippur. And they actually, it was like an 8-day celebration with a pause for one day in the middle for Yom Kippur. And the Gemara answers, this is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the word day mentioned in this context and the word day mentioned there with regard to the dedication of the tabernacle. Just as there, when they dedicated the tabernacle, it was on 12 consecutive days. Here, when they dedicated Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, it was done on 7 consecutive days that included Yom Kippur. It was stated above that a divine voice issued forth and said to the people, all of you are designated for life in the world to come. The Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that God pardoned them for this sin of eating and drinking on Yom Kippur? And the Gemara answers, the sage Tachlifa taught in a Baraisa that the verse states, on the 8th day, he sent the people away, and they blessed the king and went to their tents joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that the Lord had done for David, his servant, and for Israel, his people. Note that they're talking about the good that God had done for his servant David. David had already died. It was Solomon who had been ruling for quite a while and who built the temple. But it was David who initially conceived the temple, collected funds for it, chose the spot, and then it was Solomon who merited to build it. And they remembered David at the time that it was built and dedicated. At any rate, the people went home joyfully, returning to their tents. So they must have been forgiven, and they knew that they were forgiven even for the sin of eating and drinking on Yom Kippur. Now, this verse, on the 8th day, he sent the people away, and they blessed the king and went to their tents joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that the Lord had done for David, his servant, for Israel, his people. This verse may be expounded as follows. The words, to their tents, indicate that they went and found their wives in a state of purity, of tahara. As, in other words, that all the women, nobody was having their period. And in fact, even had their period, had the count of clean days afterward, immersed in the mikveh, and were ready to receive their husbands so that they could rejoice together as husbands and wives do. So the term joyful in our verse is referring to the fact that they had enjoyed the splendor of the divine presence. Everyone who was present in Jerusalem had enjoyed the splendor of the divine presence, as there was a revelation of the divine presence when the offerings were sacrificed in the temple. The phrase, and glad of heart, refers to the fact that each of their wives conceived a male child from the rejoicing that they did when they all got back home. And the words, for all the goodness, indicate that a divine voice issued forth and said to them, all of you are designated for life in the world to come. This was sort of like the apex, almost like the peak. Perhaps it was the peak of the spiritually exalted state of the Jewish people living in the land. Right? As soon as Solomon died, it went downhill fast. Right? His son was a totally ineffective king. The kingdom split into two, Judea and the northern kingdom of Israel. And just problems ensued, eventually leading to the destruction of the first temple. Eventually, there would be a second temple, but never as miraculous or as spiritually lofty as the first temple. And so the moment when that temple was complete, it's like the whole nation was so exalted that there was a palpable holiness throughout the whole kingdom. And as you can see, it's like it was miraculous. Like everybody came home in this state of joy. All the husbands and wives were together. They all conceived that night. I mean, is that kind of a world at that time. Okay. And the aforementioned verse stated, for all the goodness that the Lord had done for David, his servant, and for Israel, his people. And the Gemara asks, well, granted, when the verse mentions the goodness that God did for Israel, his people, this is referring to the fact that he pardoned them for the sin of eating on Yom Kippur that year. But what is the goodness that God performed for David, his servant? And Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, when Solomon sought to bring the ark into the temple, the gates clung together. The ark containing the tablets of testimony, the tablets of the Ten Commandments, and the original Torah scroll written by Moses. That was the ark. It had been held in the tabernacle during those centuries after Joshua led the people into the land and before Solomon built the temple. So eventually when the temple was built, it was time to bring the ark into the sanctuary and into the Holy of Holies in the holy temple. But when Solomon sought to enter with the ark, the gates of the temple could not be opened. Right? It wasn't like the blacksmith had done a bad job, that the locksmith had done a bad job. The gates would not open for a spiritual reason. They were blocked by God. So what happened? The gates clung together and could not be opened. Solomon recognized that it wasn't a physical, problem with the hardware. So he uttered 24 songs of praise, and his prayer was not answered. He began and he said, lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Psalm 24. But once again, his prayer was not answered, and the temple gates remained closed. So then Solomon spoke again, and he said, now therefore arise, O Lord God, into your resting place, you and the ark of your strength. Let your priests, O Lord God, be clothed with victory, and let your pious ones rejoice in goodness. O Lord God, do not turn away the face of your anointed. Remember the faithful love of David, your servant. That's from 2 Chronicles 6:41 and 42. And then he was immediately answered. Like they didn't open throughout that whole long passage that I just read until he said, remember the faithful love of David, your servant. And then he was immediately answered. At that moment, the faces of David's enemies turned dark like the charred bottom of a pot. And all knew that the Holy One, blessed be he, forgave David for the sin involving Bathsheba, as they saw that it was only in his merit that the gates of the temple opened. Solomon was maybe the greatest king in history, the wisest person in our history, who merited to build a temple, even though David himself did not merit to build a temple. But that was David's punishment, that he didn't merit to build a temple himself. Nevertheless, his merit was tremendous. He was forgiven for the sin of Bathsheba. And we still sing, David, Melech Yisrael, hi, Vekayim. David is the king of Israel. He will live forever. His praises forever. And the Mashiach will be a descendant of King David, right? So we always mention King David, and it was in his merit that the gates finally swung open. And everyone who had been an enemy of David, was sort of ate mud on that day and realized that he was so dear to God. And the Gemara relates that Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda, the son of converts, studied the portion dealing with oaths in the study hall of Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai. Why are we suddenly switching topics on this? Is it because we've mentioned these rabbis a moment ago? It's like, what exactly is the transition for this? We're just going to go. It's like, with no warning, we seem to be shifting gears, but let's see exactly what the relationship is. Because we didn't mention Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai before. At any rate, so Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda, the son of converts, studied the portion dealing with oaths in the study hall of Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai. And after completing their studies, their disciples took leave of their master in the evening, but did not yet leave the city. Maybe because we're talking about returning to their tents that the people left after the dedication of the temple and celebrating Sukkos. Well, actually, but after the dedication is when they went home, I guess, to their temporary dwellings, or the ones who lived close enough that they could go home and enjoyed everything we've been talking about. At any rate, right, so now these sages are in the study hall of Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai, and after completing their studies, the disciples took leave of their master in the evening, but they didn't leave the city. So in the morning, they went back and took leave of him a second time. And he said to them, "Did you not already take leave of me yesterday in the evening? You said goodbye to me yesterday. You came back just to say goodbye again?" And they said to him, "You have taught us, our teacher, that a disciple who takes leave of his teacher and then stays overnight in the same city must take leave of him an additional time, as it is stated at the conclusion of the dedication of the temple. On the 8th day, he sent the people away, and they blessed the king. And elsewhere it is written, and on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people away." So there we see, they celebrated the 7 days of the temple, and then the 7 days of Sukkos, and then he sent them away, right? So they had the full celebration. And so on the 8th day, meaning at the end of Sukkos, right? At the end of Shmini Atzeret, then they were gone, they were leaving. And elsewhere it is written, on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people away. So it already wrote, on the 8th day, he sent them away. And then again it says, on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people away, which is the same day. So the 8th day in the verse is referring to Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly, which is the 22nd of the month of Tishrei. And yet it says that he sent the people away on the next day, which is the 23rd of the month. So I made a mistake there. So the 22nd day of Tishrei is Shmini Atzeret, when it says he sent them away. But then it says again he sent them away on the 23rd day. So rather, it can be derived from here that a disciple who takes leave of his teacher, but then stays overnight in the same city, must say goodbye to him an additional time, just as the Jewish people took leave of Solomon an additional time on the day after the festival on the 23rd of Tishrei, right? Shmini Atzeret ended. All Jewish days in the Jewish calendar begin the night before. So then at sunset of the next day, it's, now it's the 23rd day. So they said goodbye at the end of Shmini Atzeret, while it was still basically the 22nd. Then they said goodbye again because they probably stayed overnight. They're not going to start traveling at night. So the next morning when they start traveling, they said goodbye once again to Solomon and to Solomon's temple. And Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai said to his son, "These two people, Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda, the son of converts, are men of noble form, wise and learned individuals. Go to them so that they shall bless you." So he went, right? So this is the son of Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai, went to get a blessing from Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda, the son of converts. He said, go get a blessing from them. So he went and found them. Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai's son went and found them, deep in discussion, raising apparent contradictions between verses as follows. It is written, "Make level the path of your feet and let all your ways be established." Proverbs 4:26. Indicating that when one has the opportunity to perform more than one mitzvah, he must evaluate which one of them is most important. But elsewhere it is written at Proverbs 5:6, lest you level out the path of life, indicating that one must perform each mitzvah as the opportunity arises without considering its relative importance. After all, we do not know the relative importance of mitzvahs. Right? We don't know if one mitzvah is more important than another. You would think that, well, if it's included in the 10 Commandments, that's one of the most important mitzvahs, and that's going to be more important than a smaller mitzvah, like giving $1 to a homeless person so he should have something to eat, which isn't mentioned in the 10 Commandments. But it's not that way. We don't know the relative importance of mitzvahs. So which is it? If we're confronted with 2 mitzvahs, should we figure out which one is more important for us to do? Or if confronted with 2 mitzvahs, whichever one came our way first, that's the one you do, because you just do a mitzvah when you get the chance to do a mitzvah. So they explain, la kasha, it's not difficult. Here in the first verse cited above, it is discussing a mitzvah that could be done by others, and therefore one must consider what is most worthwhile for him to perform himself and what he will leave to others. And there, we're on the B side, there in the other verse is referring to a mitzvah that cannot be done by others, and therefore one must not consider its relative importance, but do it immediately. If they're both for you to do, then do whichever one came to you first. If both mitzvahs can be done at the same time, because you're going to do it and the other people are going to do the other mitzvah, okay, so then which is better for you to do it and then let other people do the other one? And the 2 scholars, Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda, the son of converts, once again sat and raised the following dilemma. In one place it is written, in praise of the Torah, Proverbs 3:15, she is more precious than rubies, and all of your desires are not to be compared to her. And one can infer from here that all human desires cannot be compared to the Torah, to the exclusion of the desires of heaven, i.e. mitzvahs. What does heaven desire? That we do what we are commanded to do. So, for something that we want to do, we always put it aside if we have an opportunity to learn Torah. But what about if we're presented with an opportunity to do a mitzvah? And the choice is, shall I learn Torah, which is a mitzvah, or shall I do a physical mitzvah, some activity? Now, if it's 2 mitzvahs are before me, if Torah is the most precious thing, maybe I should always choose to study Torah over doing a different mitzvah, like sending away a bird before gathering eggs, one of those mysterious mitzvahs, a chuk. But the desires of heaven, mitzvahs, can indeed be compared to her. But elsewhere it is written, Proverb 8:11, for wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it, which indicates that even mitzvahs cannot be compared to the Torah. So they resolve this contradiction by stating that here in the second verse, it is discussing a mitzvah that can be done by others. In that case, even mitzvahs cannot be compared to the Torah, and accordingly, one who is engaged in Torah studies should not interrupt his studies in order to perform another mitzvah. However, there in the first verse, it is discussing a mitzvah that cannot be done by others. And in that case, Torah study is not more important than the mitzvah, and one should interrupt his studies in order to perform that mitzvah, which if you don't do it, no one will. When Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda, the son of converts, noticed that Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai's son was sitting there waiting to get a blessing, they said to him, "What do you want here?" And he said to them, "Father told me, go to them so that they should bless you." They said to him as follows, "May it be God's will that you should sow and not reap, that you should bring in and not take out, that you should take out and not bring in, that your house should be destroyed and your lodging place should be inhabited, that your table should become confused, and that you should not see a new year." That's a blessing. When he came back to his father, the son of Shimon Ben Yohai said to Shimon Ben Yohai, "Not only did they not bless me, but they even caused me pain with their negative words." His father said to him, "What exactly did they say to you?" He answered, "They said to me such and such." And Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai said to his son, "These are all blessings." Uttered in a cryptic manner, true, but this is what they meant. When they said that you should sow and not reap, they meant that you should bear sons and they should not die. Their statement that you should bring in and not take out means that you should bring in brides for your sons, and your sons should not die, which would cause their wives to leave your house and return to their fathers' houses. When they said that you should take out and not bring in, they meant that you should have daughters, and their husbands should not die, which would cause your daughters to return to your house. When they said that your house should be destroyed and your lodging place should be inhabited, this should be interpreted allegorically. What does it mean? As this world is compared to your lodging place, and the world to come is your home. Right? Now, we've had that teaching before. The Chafetz Chaim, I think Nina brought this down, lived incredibly humbly, like such a famous, prominent scholar, lived in a tiny apartment with like almost no furniture. And somebody came to visit him and said, Rabbi, you have no furniture. What's going on? And he said, well, where's your furniture? The guy said, I'm traveling. I'm just passing through. And the Chafetz Chaim said, right, and I'm just passing through also, right? This world is a place we're passing through. So the blessing that they were saying to him is that you should view this world as a hotel, right? Like temporary residence. And where are you destined for? The life of the world to come, which is your permanent abode. And as it is written, their inward thought, kirbam, is that their houses shall continue forever. Psalm 49:12. And the sages said, do not read it as their inward thought, kirbam. Rather, read it as their graves, kivram. According to this reading, one's grave is considered his permanent house. And the sages gave Rabbi Shimon Ben Yohai's son a blessing that he should dwell in his temporary home rather than his permanent home, i.e., he should live a long life, right? So you shouldn't get to your grave yet, but then when you get there, you're going to your permanent place. And when they said that your table should become confused, they meant that you should be blessed with many sons and daughters so that there will be noise and confusion at your table. And when they said that you should not see a new year, they meant your wife should not die, and as a result, you should not have to marry another woman, about which it says, Deuteronomy 24:5, when a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war, neither shall he be charged with any business. He shall be free at home for 1 year. So that should only happen to you once in your life. You shouldn't have a second year of staying home and celebrating. Apropos a blessing with an obscure meaning, the Gemara relates, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta took leave of Rav, and his father said to him, go to him so that he should bless you. And when Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta returned to him for a blessing, Rav said to him, may it be God's will that you should not shame others and that you should not feel ashamed. He came home to his father, who said to him, what did he say to you? He said to him, mere words, he said to me. He did not say anything of significance. And after Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta repeated what Rav had said, his father said to him, he blessed you with the blessing with which the Holy One, blessed be He, blessed Israel, and then repeated the blessing, indicating that it is a very great blessing, as it is written from Joel 2:26 and 2:27, and you shall eat in plenty and be satisfied and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you, and my people shall never be ashamed. And you shall know that I am the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and there is none else, and my people shall never be ashamed. Hold your head high in this world, and what a blessing that is. May you never come to shame, and may you never bring others to shame. And that concludes this section of Agadata. Beautiful, kind of folkloric, incident-based wisdom teachings, based on the idea we don't mix joy and joy. During the intermediate days, you shouldn't have a wedding. That was a long digression. Beautiful. And now we actually get back to our Mishnah. We've been learning the 7th Mishnah here in chapter 1 of Tractate Moed Katan. So we're going to go back to it, but we're right away going to get some very interesting teachings. So it was taught in the Mishnah And a woman may engage in all of her usual cosmetic treatments on the intermediate days of the festival. The sages taught in a baraisa, these are the cosmetic treatments of women that are permitted. She may paint her eyelids, she may remove unwanted hair, and she may put rouge on her face. And some say she may pass a comb over her lower face, i.e. that she may remove body hair. And the Gemara relates that Rav Chisda's wife would adorn herself on the intermediate days of a festival in the presence of her daughter-in-law, i.e. when she already had a married son. And Rav Huna bar Chinana sat before Rav Chisda, and he sat and said, they taught only that a woman is permitted to engage in cosmetic treatments on the intermediate days of a festival, only with regard to a young woman, as such treatments bring her joy. But in the case of an old woman, no, the treatments are not permitted, as she does not need them. Right? So one sage here argues, yeah, older women, they don't have to make themselves beautiful. It doesn't bring them as much joy as younger women who are out there looking for a husband. What was the answer from Rav Chisda to this statement? Rav Chisda said to him, by God, even your mother, and even your mother's mother, and even a woman so old that she is standing on the edge of her grave are all permitted to adorn themselves. As people say in the popular adage, a woman of 60 years, like one of 6, runs at the sound of the timbrel, implying that women of all ages are young in spirit. Since they all take pleasure in their adornments, they are allowed to adorn themselves regardless of age. And don't you ever make that mistake again, Rabbi Hinana, says Rabbi Chisda. Rav Chisda. I added that don't you ever make that mistake again. But I mean, it was pretty strong, the rebuke and the answer that came from Rav Chisda. It was taught in the Mishna that Rabbi Yehuda says, she may not apply lime to her skin. On these cosmetic treatments that women can do during the intermediate days, Rabbi Yehuda says she may not apply lime to her skin because it renders her temporarily unattractive and she will be distressed during the festival. Don't do these treatments that are difficult on you and that stress you out. It is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says a woman may not apply lime to her skin on the intermediate days of a festival because it is temporarily a disgrace to her as she appears unattractive until it is peeled off. What is lime used for in the ancient world? I'm assuming it's a depilatory to remove hair. I'm not sure. So Rabbi Yehuda says a woman may not apply lime to her skin on the intermediate days because it is temporarily a disgrace to her as she appears unattractive until it is peeled off. But Rabbi Yehuda concedes that with regard to lime that she can peel off during the festival, she may apply it on the intermediate days of the festival, as even though she is distressed now, as the lime renders her appearance unattractive, she will be happy afterward when the lime is removed and she can see the results. So if the lime is going to go on and come off, okay, it's going to be permitted on the intermediate days of the festival. What you wouldn't do is some kind of a treatment that's a multi-day treatment, and then she's going to have this like ugly lime, layer on her skin throughout the days of the festival. And the Gemara asks, but does Rabbi Yehuda accept this reasoning that it is permitted despite the fact that it causes distress because it will cause joy later? Didn't we learn elsewhere in a Mishnah, in Avodah Zarah 2a, on the 3 days before the holidays of idolaters, it is prohibited to do business with them so as not to cause them to thank their idols for their success. Similarly, it is prohibited on these days to lend to them, to borrow from them, to repay a debt to them, or even to collect a debt from them. Right? So you don't want to do business with them that they might be happy about because then it's going to cause them to go thank their idols during that holiday. And Rabbi Yehuda says, what you don't want is that the idolater, should perform idolatry based on an action that you inspired. Like you did business with them, they feel good about it, they're going to thank their idol for that. You don't want to have anything to do with their idolatry. And Rabbi Yehuda says, well, one may collect a debt from them during this period due to the fact that the idolater is distressed when he makes the payment. He's not going to thank his idol that he had to pay you back the loan that you made to him. And the rabbi said to him, well, even though he is distressed now, he will be happy afterward as he is relieved from the debt, and therefore it is prohibited to collect a debt from him during those 3 days before his holiday. In this Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda considers only the immediate distress and does not consider the joy that will be experienced after some time. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, leave aside the laws governing a festival, which cannot be compared to other areas, as all of the labors that are permitted on a festival are permitted because even though one is distressed by them now, he will be happy about them afterward. For example, cooking and baking are permitted even though preparing food involves effort and trouble, because eating the festive meal afterwards provides pleasure and enjoyment. So, therefore, we should allow the woman to put the lime on her skin, because when she peels it off, she's going to feel good about it, as long as she can put it on during the intermediate days of the holiday, as long as she's going to also take it off, presumably on that same day or soon after. And Ravina said a different explanation. According to Rabbi Yehuda, with regard to repaying a debt, the idolater is always distressed, even after he repays a debt. However, in general, when Rabbi Yehuda accepts the principle of taking into account the joy that will be experienced at a later time. In general, he does, but not in this case. With regard to applying lime to one's body, Rabbi Yehuda said the daughters of Israel who reached physical maturity, meaning they started to have body hair, but had not yet reached the age of majority, i.e., girls that were less than 12 years of age, and therefore they were embarrassed by their precocious physical development, they would seek to remove this excess body hair. And the poor among them would smear their skin with lime in order to remove the hair, and the wealthy ones would smear themselves with fine flour for this purpose. And the daughters of kings would smear themselves with shemen hamor, as it is stated with regard to the women who were brought to King Achashverosh in the book of Esther, 6 months with shemen hamor, right, the beautifying oil. And the Gemara asks, what is shemen hamor? So Rav Huna Bar Chia said, this is the perfume that is called setaket. And Rav Yirmiyah Bar Ami said, it is olive oil extracted from an olive that has not yet reached 1/3 of its growth. The acidic oil is effective for hair removal. And it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says, wherever the Mishnah mentions anpikinon, it is referring to olive oil from an olive that has not yet reached 1/3 of its growth. And why do women spread it on their body? It is due to the fact that it removes the hair and pampers the skin. It was related, I'm almost done, so if you got questions, get them in. It was related that Rav Bevai had a daughter and he spread lime on her limb by limb, which caused her hair to fall out and her skin to whiten. And she became so beautiful that when marrying her off, he took 400 dinars for her. And there was a certain non-Jew in his neighborhood who also had a daughter and wanted to do this as well. And he spread her entire body with lime all at once, and she died. And the non-Jew said, Bevai killed my daughter. And Rav Nachman said, Rav Bevai, who regularly drinks beer, his daughters require that they be smeared with lime, as beer causes hair growth. But we, who do not drink beer, our daughters do not require that they be smeared with lime, as they have little hair, even without this treatment. And also, he spread the lime on her one limb at a time, and the guy who thought he understood the process spread it on his daughter's whole body all at once. Don't consult an expert when doing serious procedures like that. Okay. That was a big daf, a lot of material covered, a lot of agadata. When we first started doing this together, my friends, I was really, like a page this long, I would have selected, portions to cover to make sure that we cover them well and I'm not moving too fast. But I gotta say, judging from the questions that we get every day and the way that this group shows up consistently every day, I feel like we're just able to do the whole daf, and now so many times we're doing entire pages that didn't feel appropriate when we first started this journey together. So, Yasher Koach, may you be strengthened to keep learning at this higher level than when you started doing Daf Yomi with us. The class is doing great. All right, let's go to questions and comments. second. Google signed me out. Signing back in. Okay, John Pittman. What was the lesser punishment for eating on Yom Kippur? Right. So what they were saying was it's a lesser that the punishment for eating on Yom Kippur is kares, as opposed to intentionally violating Shabbos, where the punishment is stoning. Right. And kares is death at the hands of the heavenly court. Stoning is death at the hands of the earthly court. Stoning means if the court convicts you for an offense punishable by stoning, so then you get executed right there. Death at the hands of the heavenly court, we've discussed that a few times. It could mean that you die a little bit prematurely. It could mean that you die in your 50s. It could mean that your life is just shortened a little. It could be that you're now under threat of having your life shortened, but later an atonement could take care of it. So it's definitely a lesser penalty than being executed now. Yosef, question. If those with tzara'as are not contagious, why would they be quarantined and need to announce it? So that why, right? This is something that we talked about yesterday, that when one has tzara'as, this physical manifestation of a spiritual malady, that they're quarantined during it, and while they're walking outside, they have to announce, tameh, tameh, I am impure. They're not announcing that to say, I have a contagious disease, make sure you don't touch me because you could catch tzara'as. No, they're announcing it for two reasons, and we had this, right? One reason is, if you touch me, you'll become tameh, ritually impure. You would then not be able to enter the temple or eat consecrated food if you're qualified to eat consecrated food until you immerse in a mikvah and await nightfall. You're not because you're going to catch tzara'as. And the other reason they would say tameh, tameh is because, well, they're going through a heavy thing in their life. They contracted this disease because they spoke Lashon Hara or something else. And so they're going through a period of self-examination, and they hope that they'll grow from it, and then the skin condition will pass, and then they're going to go through a 7-day purification even after the tzara'as has gone away. So because this person is going through that difficulty, when you learn that somebody's going through that, oh, he's saying tameh, tameh, he must have tzara'as, I'm going to pray for him that his tzara'as pass quickly, that he grow from the experience. I pray for him, and that's why they announce that, but not because it's a contagious disease. Waynette Riggs, I am 78 years old, but was tickled when you read to us that old women, even standing next to their grave, were allowed to make themselves beautiful, even on the intermediate days of the festival. Suddenly, about 20 hearts flew up the side of the comment page. Amen. Beautiful, right? That was a good teaching. It was Rav Chisda, right? Rav Chisda. And I loved how he just said, by God, what do you think you're saying that older women can't adorn themselves? He came in strong. Ifa. I may be mistaken, but I have heard that lime was used to lighten skin color. It is also possible that it might have been used like some kinds of mud that clean pores and tighten skin. Interesting. So it seems like it was used for removing hair, but it also had an effect on the skin, as we saw, right? That it helped Rav Bevai's daughter, to become so beautiful that she married very well. But we're also learning that it was a treatment of the poor girls of Israel, right? And that the richer ones would smear themselves with fine flour to remove hair, and the daughters of kings with that special oil. So the lime, not really the poor, it was just like for like the general people, right? The general people, the rich with the fine flour, and the princesses with the Shemen Hamor. And finally, Laura Karim, I don't understand how olive oil is supposed to remove hair. Is it a lubricant for shaving? Are there other ingredients? So apparently they're talking not about the olive oil that we're used to, but this olive oil made from immature olives. And perhaps there was, in the processing, it became a product that would have that effect. I don't know any more than you do about that. But it sounds like it worked, but it was a special oil for that purpose. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. What an exciting daf. Yashikok to you for, journeying with me through this big, big page and doing all of it. May you have a beautiful, beautiful Shabbos, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night about an hour after Shabbos ends in LA. So I think we're going to end up being about 7:30.